Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Inside Archaeology, where we dig into the science of the past. Do you want to become an archaeologist but aren't sure where to start? Or do you want to learn more about what the day job is like of an archaeologist or the different career paths that you can take within this very broad sector? Well, you've come to the right place. This video is a part of my Ask an Archaeologist series where I speak to real archaeologists from all over the world about their careers, best and worst field experiences, favorite discoveries, and more. It's a chance for you to learn what archaeology is really like. And spoiler alert, it's not like how it looks in the movies. Our guest today is Dr. Smiti Nathan. She has a PhD in archaeology with a specialty in archaeobotany, the study of ancient plants, from a New York University, and has worked on field projects in Ethiopia and Oman. She currently juggles three roles: founder and CEO of Anthico, a human centered educational services consultancy, co director of the Archaeological Water Histories of Oman project, and as an archaeobotanist for the Southern Red Sea Archaeological Histories project. In the past, she's worked in user experience research, higher education, archaeology, information management, and geospatial sciences. She somehow also finds time to run the Habits of a Traveling Archaeologist and Life Design Log websites and social media accounts. Before we begin, don't forget to take a few seconds to subscribe or like to tell the algorithm to promote this video to new viewers. If you're feeling extra generous, you can make a Ko-fi donation or super thanks, or check out my Redbubble shop for some archaeology themed merch. Okay, time to dig in to the interview. Welcome to Inside Archaeology, Smitty. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, we're going to just jump right into our first question today, which is what first sparked your interest in archaeology?
So in high school, we often had to take career tests. And I think it was my junior year. I took one of these tests and it spitted out anthropology. And as a high schooler, I did not know what that was. So I looked it up and I found it to be intriguing. And then I stumbled across archaeology. And doing the bit of research I did at that time, archaeology was not what I thought it was. It didn't resemble what I saw in pop culture. And I found it really fascinating. For me, I likened it to a puzzle in which you don't have all the pieces, but you can still say something interesting. And that conceptualization of a puzzle just really stuck with me as I was going into college and thinking about, pursuing a career in archaeology. So I think it was one random career quiz that sparked my interest in pursuing anthropology and now specifically anthropological archaeology.
That's very different, I think, to a lot of people who start off by saying Indiana Jones, which is what 100% what it was for me. But that's really great. So you went on to study anthropology slash archaeology, and then you went on to specialize in GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems, and then archaeobotany. How did you kind of end up doing those two strands of archaeology?
So in college, I was interested in archaeology. I went to field schools, and of course, I was taking classes. And it was in my last year that I actually discovered GIS, and I was really hooked. And it was almost on a whim that I applied to UCL's program in GIS and spatial analysis and archaeology. And I got in, so I went to UCL to study GIS specifically. And around that time, I learned about archaeobotany, which is ancient plant analysis. And UCL has a great program in both archaeobotany and GIS. So actually, it was my master's dissertation where I first started exploring integrating GIS data and archaeobotanical data sets. And that's a theme that I've continued in my research in various different ways. But yeah, I just liked maps and I liked food, specifically plants. And I was like, okay, let's see if we can put them together. So.
That's really cool. On that note, you have your PhD. Can you tell us a little bit more about your thesis topic and why you chose it?
So my thesis topic was looking at Bronze Age agriculture in Oman, specifically oasis agriculture. And I used various different methods, including GIS and archaeobotany, to investigate local changes in terms of what people were farming, but also broader changes regionally in terms of where they were deciding to settle and which types of oases. And then, of course, I did some ethnoarchaeology in the mix to learn how people were farming in present day Oman. Not saying it's an analogy to the past, but I personally had no experience at that point farming in Oman, so I wanted to talk to people who had farmed in that type of environment.
And what were kind of the broad conclusions that you got out of it?
So we noticed that people were selecting locations during that time period with a cognizance of water in mind. And then in terms of agriculture, we actually didn't get a lot in terms of the archaeobotanical data set. So it was a really interesting exercise. And what can I say when I don't have a lot of ancient seeds at hand?
Mhm,
So we were looking at ancient trees as well. So I picked up learning about tree anatomy. So people were cultivating local plants, and we actually found some more weeds in the record in that area than we had before. So the archaeobotanical discoveries, I would say, weren't as far reaching. But what was interesting to me about my thesis was, okay, we don't have a ton of data, but what can we say? So it really linked back to that whole spark about a puzzle in the
mhm,
beginning. And just to say, you don't have to have super groundbreaking data to have a viable dissertation. I did find some interesting things and I had some questions. So I went through the whole process of gaining those skills with still being able to tell a story in the end. And I think those are also things that are worth reporting.
mhm. Once you finished your PhD, you then kind of took a little bit of a career sidestep, similar kind of to what I ended up doing, I think, as well, and started working in digital innovation and user experience. Can you tell me why exactly you decided to go down this route?
Before starting my dissertation, I actually worked in a corporate space too. I was a geospatial
Mhm,
contractor. So that was a great experience to know that there was life outside of academia, which I think is really important going into an intensive doctoral academically focused program. So throughout my PhD, I wasn't completely sold on academic archaeology as a career path. So the professorial path
mm.
for a variety of reasons, which I won't
Mhm.
bog you down with, but you're welcome to ask more. But anyway, as I was wrapping up my dissertation, so this was in the summer, I was exploring, okay, what could I do outside of archaeology? I still want to engage with the field, but given the way that the job market is and also my interest level, I'm not sure if this is something I want to commit to in terms of pursuing a professor path. So my husband had his PhD in physics and he was already working in the corporate space as a management consultant. And he said, I think you might be interested in this field, design thinking. And so I started reading up on it. I talked to some people and I found it to be quite interesting. And through design thinking is where I learned about UX, so user experience. So after my PhD, or right before my defense, I would say I had a bit of a freak accident and I complexly tore my meniscus and I couldn't walk. So I made it to my defense, fortunately. But right after my defense, I was pretty much out of commission from doing any type of paid work for about like half a year. So I had a good amount of time to explore. Now, as hard as the academic job market is, breaking into the UX job market in Germany as a non-native, like I don't speak German fluently, was quite challenging. So I was grateful to land an internship where I got to see design thinking and user experience in a corporate setting. So that planted the seed of interest, and my subsequent jobs after that had a somewhat UX element to it. And my latest job that I had, I came to the conclusion that while I'm interested in design thinking, especially as it relates to career development, user research for me or user experience research for me is not the field that I want to commit to. It ended
Mhm.
up just not being a fit, but I really appreciated going on that journey.
And I can imagine there's probably a lot of transferable skills from that back into archaeology.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it works two ways. A lot of anthropologists end up going into user experience research because a lot of the skills we developed in our PhD or in our training transfer quite well into that field, and then vice versa.
Mhm.
So.
How did you end up in Germany? Just as a side question.
Yeah, no worries. So my husband's German.
Oh,
We
okay.
met while we met while I studied in UCL. We did long distance for a while, and then actually I needed to do archaeobotanical research, and it's a pain to import archaeobotanical remains into the US. So I was working with a lab in Paris, and I was talking to the head of the lab there, and they said, "Oh, there's also a lab you could probably collaborate with in Germany as well." And I was like, "That sounds good. I would like to see, my now husband more than, once every couple months." So I ended up moving to Germany to actually finish a lot of the analysis for my dissertation and live with my now husband.
So you've mentioned that you obviously decided that user experience and whatnot was not exactly for you. So in 2022, you started your own consultancy, your own business. Can you tell us a bit more about the thinking behind why you decided to do this, and how has the journey been?
I'll start with the logic behind it. So
Sure.
it was through a lot of therapy and encouragement that I finally decided to start a business. I worked for various organizations in different roles, especially after my PhD. And sadly, I found myself in either toxic situations or hitting a supposed ceiling. So there wasn't much room for mobility. So I initially took a mental health break. And yes, I worked hard. I built a savings with my partner. I had a backup plan, but at the end of the day, I was really privileged to be able to take this break. And through taking this break, and again, lots of therapy and encouragement, that I finally made the decision to start my company.
Mhm,
So, in terms of how it's going, I launched my company before I was ready or before I really knew what it was going to be about. I'm a person who has a lot of different interests, as you
mhm,
can probably glean from what I've mentioned before. So I didn't know what I really wanted to focus on. So I decided on some areas that I would try out, basically doing many experiments. And the crux of it was I wanted to gather data to see if there was something that I enjoyed doing, that I was good at, that I could make an income with eventually. So over the last year and a half, I've been doing these little experiments, gathering data for myself, and I've decided to sunset certain options and focus on other areas. So I'm thinking by early next year, I'll have a clearer picture on how I want to move forward with my business.
mhm. What are the different strands that you've been working in with it?
So one is obviously the free archaeology education that I mainly do on YouTube. And then another part of it is design thinking for career development. And that's through this approach of designing your life, which I worked at Johns Hopkins University for almost 2 years as a life design educator, helping students think about different career options and paths. And then that also intertwined a bit with some of the user experience research that I was doing. So I would consult for organizations, and I still do. Sometimes it's hosting workshops, or sometimes it's speaking events, sometimes it's working directly on a boutique offering. So that was the other main strand of my business.
Hmm, that sounds really, really interesting. Especially, I feel like life design for archaeologists is something we probably really need.
Thank you. That's good to know.
How do you balance doing all these different work strands? Because I saw on your website as well that you're still also involved in the academic space as well as like a director on several archaeological projects.
So I'm a co-director. So the way one of the projects I'm on, for example, the Archaeological Water Histories of Oman project, we have our main director, and then there's three of us who are co-directors, and then there's various students and consultants. So I am not the head person in charge, but I still have a leadership role. So that takes a bit of the weight off, I would say, with that. On the YouTube side, I have a team. I wish I could hire them full time, but they're on a contract basis, and we figure out what's a good working environment and solution for them. And I am just so grateful. When I first started my company, I was very hesitant on bringing on people. I'm working off my savings initially for this channel, so I was very hesitant to
Mm.
invest in that way. But it was the best investment because my team gives me a lot of energy. We're doing topics and we're working on content that we're really excited about, and it helps keeps things moving. So that's the other way I balance the work strands is that I have help.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, that's something that is important to highlight is how often it can be helpful just to even have a sounding board. I use my
Yes.
husband for that all the time. I A lot of the time when I make my, like, short form content, he's my "Is this actually funny?" test, because he's not an archaeologist.
Yes.
So, if it makes him laugh or if he thinks it makes sense, then I'm like, "Okay, this appeals to a broad audience." So, in that respect then, considering, like, started a new company, still have some ongoing projects, what would you kind of like to achieve next on your career journey?
Honestly, I'm really excited about YouTube, specifically creating videos. I know we've talked about this offline before, but when you're first starting out with YouTube, you're trying to think of what should I make content about? And you try different things, and then you eventually decide to focus in certain areas. And I would describe my channel as like mini documentaries on what I think are interesting topics, and I hope other people think are interesting too. And it's really energizing and exciting, and it seems to be successful in a sense for my channel. It seems to be something that my audience likes. So I want to just do more of that. I just want to make more videos, and I'm sure I'll have other ideas of what I want to do in terms of career. But for I would say like the next 1 to 2 years, you just want to make more quality videos. So
Fantastic. On that note, don't forget to go subscribe to Smitty's channel if you haven't already. So, last kind of long form question that I have today is archaeology, as I'm sure you're probably aware, is very often romanticized by popular culture. And people come into it with a very, very different idea of what it is. And they end up encountering various like challenges or disillusionments, per se, um, when they first tend to arrive on site. So, something I like to ask everybody to try and provide as full of a picture of the career as possible is what are some challenges that you have come across and overcome in your career?
well, I have been doing archaeology for about 20 years now, so there's been a lot I've had to deal with racism, sexism, chauvinism, chronic illness, especially in invisible illness, and just insecurities in terms of whether I felt like smart enough or capable enough for the field.
Mhm.
Perhaps maybe of interest to people in terms of a chronic illness. So I have PCOS and what's now being diagnosed as adenomyosis. I thought it was endometriosis for a long time, but basically I have really rough periods.
Mm,
And there's far more to it than that. So, of course, I've tried different interventions throughout the years, but it's made, at least early in my career, it made managing periods while being on field work really challenging.
yeah,
And
not
so I'm
surprised.
just really, yeah. Yeah. So it's not, there's just so much to manage around that. For me, with my chronic illness, I have very heavy periods, very painful periods, and they were very hard to predict. I was not regular by any
Mhm.
means or something close to regular. So I remember during my first field season, I would have this anticipatory angst. I'm like, oh my gosh, what happens if I have my period on the field? I was reading through like the field conditions and how field work was. And like, oh, can I go to a bathroom? Do I have to like carry my pad with me until we get back to the dig house? Do I even want to take a tampon with me? Like all these things going through my head. And then thinking through, oh my gosh, if I'm in so much pain and I can't do work, how's that going to be viewed? So going through all these thoughts in my head as I was preparing for it. And that feeling didn't really go away so much. I'm happy to see that more projects and people are being more intentional about making sure that we have, enough rest breaks, access to restrooms, and having those conversations beforehand. I think there's even a whole guide on handling periods in the field. So that was something I would say that was a challenge for me because, the pain and other symptoms I had with my illness, they weren't always obvious and visible.
Yeah, they're also obviously not something that typically a lot of your supervisors would have experienced.
Mm.
So just to kind of put that delicately.
Yes.
I think hopefully that's a bit different now as we see a lot more gender parity between in senior positions in the field. But I can also say, obviously, that's not just a you thing. Like I remember when I first was going to field school in Jordan, I actually changed my birth control from one that gave me
Mhm.
a period every month to one that was every 3 months because I wanted to just not deal with it because we had like, I think our site was in the middle of nowhere, and the toilet was just, like, a box over a hole in the ground with, like, 4 posts and a burlap sack around it.
Yeah, I've heard similar stories from other people as well, and it absolutely made me feel less alone. I would
Mhm,
say the one thing that was particularly challenging with my diagnosis, and I think other people in general who are dealing or trying to manage through birth control, is finding the one that would fit well with you. And
mhm,
we with my medical provider, we decided that being on birth control was actually really good to help me manage my PCOS. But of course, it had its side effects too. So, like balancing that in the field and making those trade offs and those decisions, and the fact that the field even factored into that decision making for me,
mhm.
as I think back, I'm like, no, I probably should just do what's best for my health and my body. But, as a young PhD student or a young archaeologist, I was like, okay, well, how like maybe it's just easier just not to have it in the field, or like how do I do this? So I'm glad things are getting better and that there are more conversations about it.
That ends our kind of longer form question segment. Now I'm gonna move on to kind of my short fire round, questions, which, first off is, can you tell me what your best and worst, like, individual field experiences would be, or, like, your best and worst field memory?
In terms of my best field experience, I would say, yeah, there's been things that I've enjoyed in most of the field seasons I've been on, but I'm really proud of the most recent one that where I went into the field, and that was in 2023 in Oman. And that was for the Archaeological Water Histories of Oman project, which I'm a co-director for. And we're a small and mighty team, and we're a team with diverse work situations. So we have, team members who are school teachers, who work in cultural resource management, who are academically minded, either as professors or postdocs. So we have a quite a diverse team. And I just really appreciated that the ethos and structure of the project allowed people to come in and out as they were able. And it felt like a very sustainable way of doing academic archaeology. And I was also just happy that, we worked really hard, but we weren't working crazy hours, and we were
Mhm,
highly productive. And we had a lot to accomplish, and we weren't grinding. And one of our team members, they were finishing their dissertation research, and they mentioned that, this was one of the most relaxed field seasons that they felt like they had, and we just did so much too. So I really liked that it was a good work environment, and that's something I was really proud of to at least contribute to.
okay.
So
And worst experience?
oh man. Okay. I really don't want to call out a specific person or a project, but yes, I've been on less than ideal projects, with poor living and work conditions, mini dictators, the
Mm,
works. And those weren't fun. But I do remember a field season where, I was in a leadership position, and, the project was struggling in different ways. And it resulted in me not feeling very psychologically safe or supported. But the bigger disappointment, honestly, was more so in myself because I just didn't really like how I felt I was like treating those around me. And I don't think I was
Mhm.
intentionally mean, but I just don't think I was a good version of myself. And it was just a really important reminder to myself that I go back to in how do I want to show up, not just as a human, but like as a human doing archaeology. So it wasn't a great field experience, but I did get something out of it that I hold on to as I'm doing my work now.
Yeah. Well, you always want to try and learn something out of your worst
Yeah.
field experiences, even if in some cases it's, oh, I didn't pack enough waterproofs and I need to do that next time, which has definitely happened to me working in Scotland.
Yeah.
Next up is, what is your favorite thing? It could be a site, an artifact, a type of seed that you've ever discovered or found while working on an archaeological project.
So this is a really hard question for me, and I actually made a whole video on it. So when it comes to archaeological finds, and I don't think I've had that momentous find yet. So that's exciting to look forward to one day. Uh, but I know it sounds really cheesy, but I'm just so grateful for the people I get to work with. I really work with people that I like and respect a lot. And going through that discovery process with them, because usually when we find something in the field, whether it's a site, artifact, or a seed, as you mentioned, we might not know immediately what it is and what it means. So going through that process of figuring it out with my team is something that I just really enjoy, and it's probably one of my favorite parts of archaeology, that like figuring out that puzzle.
Huh,
So,
that's a really unique answer. I like that. If you could choose on that note, what would you like to make? What discovery would you like to make?
so the archaeobotanist in me is screaming ancient toilet. And I
Okay.
that sounds a bit odd, but there is so much you can learn about past life from a toilet. And I think it would be interesting to find because you could notice that you might have an ancient toilet on hand.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that would be something really exciting to find. But, in case there aren't ancient toilets that have preserved in the places I work in, I think it would be really cool just to find something in an unexpected place that I would recognize immediately on the spot. Because as I mentioned before, usually that discovery process for us like takes time. So immediately recognizing something and saying, okay, I know what this is, and it's usually not here. This is something significant. That would be really cool.
Penultimate question is, what advice would you give to aspiring archaeologists?
So I'm going to put on my life design hat here a bit. And I would say really take the time to explore and experiment with how you want to do archaeology. So that's a bit more of like the visioning aspect of it, because I got a lot of advice, and I even have a whole blog post on my website about like nitty gritty advice I would give to undergraduates who are interested in more of like perhaps an academic route in archaeology. But there are multiple ways to do archaeology. So thinking about that and exploring that and experimenting with that, I think is really important. Now, in terms of the day to day, as you're exploring and experimenting, I highly recommend building out your domain knowledge. That could be, going and getting a degree, but you can do that in other ways as well. Um, Developing focus skills. I think, especially in the beginning, you want to gain as many skills as possible. For example, that might be like digging, survey, lab skills, technology skills, interpretive skills. But I think there's also a good power to figuring out what you're good at, what you like doing, and what might be needed in the field, and picking a couple skills to really focus on and develop a deeper expertise there. And then finally, and this is something that I need to be better at, is building out your community and network. And I know networking seems quite transactional. Sometimes it's like, oh, let me go networking. And you have, I don't know, whatever image you might have in your head. But if you think of it as building your community, building people you like to work with, collaborate with, and just interact with. I think that's so important at any stage that you're doing archaeology. And that's something I want to focus a bit more as well on, especially building out my community and meeting other people on YouTube who do YouTube archaeology education. So I really appreciate the fact that you reached out and invited me on your channel. It means a whole lot. And yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for coming on and giving me your time. And I think that's a really great point that you make about the networking. And I think is something, people struggle, I think, more with human connection perhaps than we used to nowadays because we spend so much time in front of screens and social media, and people get so much like social anxiety sometimes about these things. That's something that I would say that I've had to overcome just in being able to like reach out to people and be like,
Yeah.
"You want to talk about archaeology with me?" And then it makes you realize that, especially when it comes to archaeology, if you're reaching out to somebody else who is an archaeologist or does it, you already have something in common. So
Yeah.
you already have common ground and you both clearly like love the subject. So it's always easy to find something to talk about. Last question for today is, where can people find you to follow you and your journey?
So my if people are interested in what I hope is interesting archaeology that is well researched, please check out my archaeology channel. It's Smiti Nathan. So that's the archaeology channel. That is really my channel for anyone who's interested in archaeology. I also do have a booktube channel, but I'll be honest, that is mainly for me. It just brings me joy. I'm not really thinking about what my audience wants. I have a lovely community there. So if you're interested in books, you can check that out too. The main social media that I'm on is Instagram, and that's Traveling Archaeologist. And that's where I share some posts, some stories, and that's really kind of for my community who's interested in aspects of my life. But I'll be honest, I'm not a very consistent poster. And then I do have LinkedIn as well for my company and my brand. And I post on there also quite infrequently, but I am there.
Well, make sure that wherever you guys are, that you go and give Smitty a follow and tune into some of her stuff because it's really excellent quality. As you said, it's well researched is the key. That's what we're trying to promote here, right? Well researched stuff presented by people who are experts in the subject.
Well, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on. That's everything for today. And hopefully we'll be able to have you back on soon or find some other ways to collaborate on the channel.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me again.
All right, time to holster our trowels, pack away our tools. That's everything for today. Did you like this video? What kind of archaeologist do you want to be? Don't forget to comment, like the video, and subscribe to both of our channels before you leave. If you're feeling extra generous, you can go to my Ko-fi page and support me with a small donation. Taking a few seconds to support me however you can helps the channel grow so that I can continue to provide you with quality heritage content that you can trust is well sourced, researched, and presented by someone who is an expert in this subject. Thank you so much for watching. Stay curious, and I hope to see you on my next adventure into the world of archaeology.